Good evening and welcome to our podcast. We are People Against Covert Torture and Surveillance, or PACS International. I'm Derek Robinson, your host. It is Saturday, March the 9th, 2019. We are here on Mondays and Saturdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time to assist and support those who are targeted individuals. Views expressed during our podcast are those of our callers and not necessarily those of PACS International. Our guest tonight is Pastor Daymond Jones, who is a retired chief of police, a former Texas Ranger, chief deputy constable, and U.S. Marshal with a 40-year career in the public safety, criminal justice field. He's worked in 5 states, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, in areas of security, fire and rescue, emergency medical services, and the prison system. In his line of work, he has often interacted directly with our nation's fusion centers and has much direct knowledge about them in terms of what they do and how they work. He is also the pastor of the Sovereign Church of Jesus with branches in Texas, Alabama, and New Jersey. This time we welcome to our podcast Chief Daymond Jones. And he is right here. Okay. Chief Daymond, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Welcome to our podcast, and we're very glad to have you with us. I've gotten lots of calls and emails, and a lot of people really looking forward to this discussion tonight.
Outstanding.
Okay, great. The first thing I would like to talk about is, and we have covered some of this last night in our discussion, and that is about the fusion centers. If you could kind of review for us the fusion centers and how they work, what agencies are involved, and how they locate potential terrorists, I guess.
Okay. I do not know the exact date that they went into effect. However, to the best of my knowledge, it was somewhere between probably November, which was right after 9/11, 2011, September. In October, I think they started putting together a few limited fusion centers in a very few select places on a pilot run. But I don't think they had the so-called bugs worked out of it to a position where they could duplicate it till probably they were 6 months to a year in. Once that happened, fusion centers began to pop up throughout the United States in densely populated areas for the most part. However, they do have some basically off-the-reservation fusion centers that's classified. And Naval Intelligence, Secret Service, and a few other people know where they're at, but the general public, even high-ranking law enforcement, do not know where they're at. So specific unit. What they do is everything from your local police department to your county, your state, and federal government, all the ABC agencies and all the local ones, it's like an octopus. It has many tentacles and reaches out in the law enforcement community across all spectrums. So they gather intelligence. They, at times, use megadata to help isolate certain people, certain groups, be they a political group, a religious group, somebody that they deem sovereign citizens under their label, that they want to keep track of who they are, where they go, what they do, to see if they want to go into a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5 in keeping up with these people. In other words, there's an initial assessment. We'll just make somebody up, Ben Johnson. I don't know nobody by that name, but I'll just make it up. If he is believed to be a sovereign citizen in El Paso, Texas, the Fusion Center nearby will hear from a local policeman that's out on the beat, hey, I got this guy and I think he's a sovereign citizen. I think he might be a domestic terrorist threat. That goes through his supervisors or the contact people. There's somebody at the El Paso Police Department that works street intelligence for just the city there. And then they have a contact person in the Fusion Center that's an El Paso police officer. So this information gets sent to him. He goes through the DEA, FBI, all the alphabet agencies. They get pictures of this guy, know where he lives, they find out where he works, tax information, family associates, so forth and so on. So they do a threat assessment. And on that assessment, then they bring in a group of quote, higher thinkers that look at all the dynamics. Is this a guy who's just exercising free speech and it's basically just him or him and 2 or 3 more people? They haven't been stockpiling food. They haven't been stockpiling weapons and medication. They haven't been out in the public quoting, inciting people to rise against the government. If they decide that, then they put them on a standby list. So maybe 6 months or a year later, they check back into it and see if anything's developed. But if it's not, then they just put them over in the white list. White can always be brought back up. It's just like we checked these people out and we found nothing that's going to warrant any of our time, investigations. We're not going to have to get into no propaganda. We're not going to do nothing. We're just going to let it sit. Looks okay. If they say it has a low-level threat, then they'll dig a little bit more. And if they don't find nothing, then they stop.
Okay, I'm sorry. Chief Daymond, did you say, what was the name of that list? Did you say it was a light list?
Like a white, W-H-I-T-E, white.
Light list, okay. All right.
Meaning no threat.
Okay, right.
And they have a different color code for things, and I don't know exactly what it is, but, red means it's red hot, and we got to move now, and we got to deploy resources and assets to deal with this immediately, right this minute. Mm-hmm. And so they have people that they give this to, and then they go into their workshop and start doing what they need to do. We can get into that later, but I'm just saying that if you move up to, for example, an off shade of white, it says there's a couple things here that look like a hangnail. Let's check it out. They'll have people that'll do a little more in-depth investigation, turn over a few more stones, look around some trees, metaphorically speaking, and see if anything else jumps out. If it don't, then they let it sit. If they find something else, they just keep going up level after level. Well, once they get to a mid-grade level, then it means they're doing things that could be a threat or could not be a threat. When they get to that level, they just put it in monitor mode. So maybe every 2 weeks or once a month, they run their name or their information on the computer and see if anything has come up anywhere in the United States or even around the world. See, the CIA, their ears have always been turned outside. Right. The federal law said their ears had to be turned outside to the rest of the world. They couldn't do anything within the United States. They could wiretap phones if a call come in from outside the United States, but if the call originated from the United States, they couldn't. Well, that's changed. The Patriot Act and these fusion centers have what they call limited inner ear, where they can turn the ears inward. Most of them's outward, but they can turn selective ears inward because they, quote, got something from the outside coming in, and they follow through inward. So the people at the Fusion Center, all these various law enforcement agencies, they can talk to the CIA. The CIA has numerous assets. And when I say assets also include their resources. So a particular man or woman can be an asset. Stockpile of firearms can be an asset. Explosives can be an asset. They have wet boys. The wet boys are the assassins. They actually go out and commit the government-sanctioned assassination of a political figure under presidential orders, or if it's not that, then it's somebody that's a mid-level, perhaps not the very top, but a mid-level to lower upper level that gives a belief to the wet boys that this has presidential authority or presidential approval, and a lot of times the president doesn't know. I've been told this before.
Really? Okay, wow. So when you're talking about the FBI, you're talking about domestic targets.
Right, yes. We have domestic and international. In other words, we got the FBI, the Secret Service works there, the Department of Defense, Law Enforcement Division, Naval Intelligence, Air Intelligence, they all work there. So at a particular center, you may have 100, you may have 200 people that work in a specific fusion center. So they're from all over the United States. So, for example, if you're a naval intelligence officer and I need you over at Houston, Texas, then I say, okay, we'll reassign you to Houston, Texas because your skill set is needed. They're lacking in naval intelligence. And so naval intelligence has assets they've been cultivating since the country started. Some of their assets go back to the 1750s, as in they've had families that they've groomed and trained from generation after generation that keeps their eyes open and does things for naval intelligence back before it ever had a name. Because at that particular time, an Army and a Navy, they were considered the only two constitutional armed forces. So, they have some things that nobody else has. And they have ways of talking and communicating with people that's out of this world.
Okay, you were describing a method of surveillance last night to me that I was astonished to learn that was happening back in the 90s. Would you like to review that?
Yes. I actually had a policeman that I knew from the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and I had a police job in Florida, and it wasn't going as good as I wanted it to, and the pay wasn't that good, so I talked to a friend, and he said, I got a friend at a fairly large police agency down in Central Florida. Excellent benefits, excellent this, that, and the next thing, and you would do good, you would thrive, and you would probably wind up with a healthy retirement. I said, okay. So he says, call this guy. He says, tell him a friend sent you and that you're certified law enforcement and you'd like to see about him helping you get your foot in the door. If he says, I don't know you from Adam's house cat and what friend. He says, if he says what friend, then you give him a name of a special government operation. And you tell him, Doug sent you and under this operation name, if he wants to go that far. So I just thought it's just like everything else. Like if I know a guy at a grocery store, but I haven't seen him in several years, but maybe we work together on a lot of things. And I say, well, we worked on on a complete reset for the store in 98. Okay, so that helps his memory. So I thought that's what he was doing. When I called the guy and I talked to him, as soon as I mentioned that operation and that guy's name, he hung up on me. I thought, initially I thought must have got disconnected. So I called back. They said, he's here. He was a lieutenant. They said, he's here, but he said he's not available to talk to you ever. Well, that kind of wigged me out. I didn't know exactly what was going on. And the very next day, my chief of police, I was at college, and just almost as soon as the day was up, I got a call from the instructor at the police academy, and he said, your chief wants you to double time it to his office now. He sounds like he's fixing to have a meltdown. I said, well, I ain't done nothing to upset him. But I went there, and he said, hey, I don't know what you call these people, but about 5 federal agents, all in black suits and a black car with a tag that don't look like no tag I've ever seen. And he said, I've seen a lot of government tags, because he used to work for federal narcotics out of Nevada back in the 60s. And so he had a lot of federal knowledge himself. He said, but I'm telling you, this is a special government plate. He said, if you run that plate, you'll probably run into people you don't want to run into. He said, I just know. And he said, they had to talk to me. And they said, you need to have a conversation with your officer and tell him never to call that man again as long as he lives. Forget the man that sent him. Forget the names of this operation. That's it, period. If he calls this man anymore, if he talks about this operation anymore or mentions even the officer's name that had him to call, we'll be back and we'll hold you responsible, Chief. And he said, so I don't know who you called. I don't know that guy's name. I don't know what department, but it's something really big with the government. And he said, I'm telling you, stay away from him because it looks like they're going to take it out on me. And he said, these are guys that will shoot you and bury you, no questions asked. He said, I'm telling you. And so they're what we used to call the men in black, but that term didn't come on to a few years later. But the next morning, I was in bed asleep, and I hear some pretty hard banging on my front door. My dogs were barking, and I could hear it, and it didn't sound like nothing no normal person would be knocking on your door, even if they're upset. It was very distinct, hard, rhythmic pounding on the door. I grabbed my gun, come off of my bed, come around the door, and the guy says, you need to disarm yourself immediately. He said, we need to talk. And I said, well, you can come in. I've seen 3 of these guys on my front porch, and 2 of them around a super dark blue or black, but I think it's dark blue, like a dark navy blue car with tinted windows with little antennas on the back of it. So I'm, automatically thinking this is some sort of law enforcement group or military people. And I said, what do you want? He says, I'm telling you, put the gun down. And 2 guys already had their hands inside their jackets, and I knew what was in them jackets. So I put my gun down, and he said, step out on the porch. And I said, I just got on my pajama bottoms. He said, we ain't worried about that. You can be naked. We don't care. Come here on the porch. And I knew it was a bad situation no matter what. So I kind of watching and thinking about my options. And anyway, when I get on the porch, the man tells me, we seen your chief of police yesterday. Has he had a conversation with you? Yes, he did. He said, did you understand that conversation? I said, yes, sir. He says, then we really don't have nothing else to talk about. You just follow your instructions. And I said, who are you? He said, we're ghosts. Ghosts. Oh. He said, we were never here. He says, but if you do any of them things you're not supposed to, you will see us again. Maybe. You may never see us. But it'll be the last thing you see on the face of this earth. So there was no doubting what the man told me. They I come to believe they were with naval intelligence. That's what I come to believe. I don't know for a fact, but I believe that, and that's just my theory based on several things I know. I sit down, and I was kind of in a cold sweat, shaking, thinking, you know, who are these people? Who could they be? By that time, I probably had 13 years in law enforcement. I've seen a lot of strange things. And I had a lot of unusual life experiences in law enforcement that, most police, if you talk to them, they say, well, I never had 90% of the stuff happen that you had happen. I said, well, I was in different geographic locations, different people, different situations. I was exposed to a lot. But anyway, the point is, I thought, I know this man in Dallas who was in the Vietnam War, and he worked for the CIA, and he was an eraser and a plumber for them, meaning he erases people's past. So your birth certificates go away, your driver's license disappears, and whoever it is, him or somebody else, goes to where you live, and they get all your records and do away with them. They cancel all your bank accounts, credit card accounts. It's like you're a nobody,
And what type of situation would they do that?
Well, I don't know, but I would say that certain people that back at that particular time, before whistleblowing activities were more protected, and certain people didn't want certain things said, then they could do a couple of things and try and get their attention. If they didn't get their attention, they could go to the next level. But if somebody picks up the phone and calls and tells Agent Micah, you got to go erase this guy. Here's your assignment. And something comes across a fax or it's hand delivered, and it gives him the information, then he goes and takes care of it. He don't never touch them. And they surveil them, but they remove everything. When I seen that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Eraser, I says, my God, they're putting on the motion picture here real life things that I know for a fact happened. Now, somebody that wrote that in a movie script might have been because somebody said this stuff really happens. They call it fiction. But I said, this is what this guy did during the 60s and 70s. But he got tired of it. And he got, and he reestablished himself in the church. He grew up in the church, and he kind of abandoned it through so many people dying in his arms and eyes and legs burn off in Vietnam to where, he just decided, hey, I've had all I can. But he went to some of the very highest levels, and he did a lot of special work for a lot of people. If I said their names, you probably know, but I can't and I won't. But the point is, I called him. He was the best thing I knew. So I called him. And I said, hey, some guys in all black suits, glasses, black car, blacked out windows. I said, these guys are like all in black. And they showed up my chief of police. And he says, got a question or something on the phone. I says, what? He says, what caused that to happen? And I says, Dougie told me to call this guy at this place about going to work the police department. He said, okay, I got to go. And I said, hello? And I'm like, dang, this is twice I've been hung up on doing this. Anyway, I called back, and his wife answered the phone. I said, where's Mikey? She says, Mikey's gone. I said, what's wrong? She said, I don't know, but what I want to tell you is I know just enough to tell you this. Sit tight, and I'm sure he'll be getting up with you. I don't know where, when, or how, but he'll be getting up with you, I'm sure. And I said, okay, well, it's pretty hard to calm down. And I had to go to the police academy that day, and I told the chief of the police department, I said, I know I'm supposed to come in tonight at like 10 o'clock, but I said, I'm really kind of wigged out about this. And he said, yeah. He said, I took a little time off too. He said, go ahead and take off. And my phone rang about 6 or 7 in the evening. And he says, you know where this truck stop is? And I said, yeah. He said, come there now. And I said, but, he says, no. He said, come here now. I said, how will I know you? He said, I'll find you. Just pull in. Well, as soon as I pulled in, I seen a truck at the very back flashing its lights on and off. So I started driving back there, and he got out on the driver's side in the commercial vehicle and kind of waved at me and told me where to park my car. He got me in the truck. He pulled the curtains all the way around the front, and then he, pushed something. I said, what's that for? He said, that's so nobody can hear what we're saying in this cab. He said, I've got a field around us, and said they can't hear. He says, look here, and he pulled back a false front, and there was all kind of radios and electronic stuff I'd never seen in my life. This is in June, July, August, somewhere in there of 1990. So we're talking like 29 years ago almost.
Okay.
And he said, I'm going to tell you some things. And I said, well, I'm kind of worried about what's going on. He said, well, he said before I left the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, he said, I called my people, and I told them you're green lit, which means I'm good, I'm okay to go, no problem, and that they need to stand down, and my people are several clicks above that lieutenant, that police department, several clicks above their people, several pay grades higher. So he says, they'll do what I say. He said, I told them, you're good, you're okay, hands off, and so long as I live, they'll never touch you. They'll never do nothing. And said, if I find out otherwise, he said, they'll never see tomorrow. He said, I'll make a phone call. He said, so they know I've got the power and the juice. He said, I can go anywhere in the world I need to and be left alone. And he said, I can make it that way for other people. He says, but he has a very few select friends. But anyway, while I was in the truck, he said, do you have an address of somebody you know? I said, yes. He said, give me that address. I said, why? He said, I'm going to punch it in on this computer over here. And, or he called it a data center, something like that. But anyway, he said, it's a regular telephone. It looks like a regular telephone in here. It looks like a mobile phone, but it's not. He said, you pick it up, you can't talk in it, not for this purpose anyway. He said, well, I'll put this in. And he said, what's going to happen is there's a frequency on an antenna up here that's going to go up to a satellite. It's going to tell that satellite to tilt exactly a certain way, so many degrees, and it's going to shoot a beam down to that house. When it hits the house, the roof, and the fixtures, when people's talking inside, you got a washing machine going, various things, it's going to pick all that up. But then I'll push a button and said it'll isolate everything outside of the human voice range. So everything else will go silent, filters. He said, you'll hear exactly what the people in that house are saying. I said, okay, it's a joke.
Hold it right there for a second, please. You were saying that this device is so specific that it could isolate all other sounds except for the human voice?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And this is from a satellite into someone's house, and you're talking about the 1990s.
Right. Yeah, about almost 29 years ago.
Wow. That answers a lot of things, because there's so much debate in our community about how sophisticated the equipment is that these agencies have. What you're describing, there was something back in the 90s that, what they have now must pale in comparison to that.
Well, what he told me is, he said, this technology may be readily available to certain sophisticated people in the next 30 or 40 years. Okay? He said, but right now, we have it. He said, I'm going to tell you something that's going to just really blow your mind. He says, before World War II was over in 1945, he said, before it was over, he said, we had similar technology, but it was in its infancy, and it was not like this here. He says, one, we didn't have satellites. Number two, you can't work it that away. He says, but he said if we was in range, he said we could shoot certain beams at a house, and it's like a big electronic ear, and said it actually goes to the house and it translates the vibrations in the wall, that the walls are actually hearing what you're saying. And said, we're getting the information out of the structure. And said we had some of that before World War II, and he said some of that stuff come out of the Philadelphia experiment, with magnetics and other apparatus. But he said, can you hear them people? I said, yes, I can hear them. I handed the phone back. He said, why you hand it back? I said, because they're having private conversation. And he says, right. He said, I'm just showing you what we got. He said, I got a device here, and said, what does it look like? And I said, it's kind of shaped like a gun, but not exactly. He said, right. And he said, you can't see nothing on it. He said, it's almost like a upside-down L shape, kind of like a gun, but not exactly. And it just looks like it's kind of plastic and a little bit of metal, right? I said, yeah. He said, watch this. He took some paper and he got a metal thing underneath it, and he was touching something on there, and some kind of almost like clear, sparkly kind of beam come out of it, went to the paper and caught it on fire, and he dropped it in that little bucket with the water. He said, I can shoot somebody with it, and he says it'll actually cook them on the inside out. And I said, what in the world? He said, if I aim this at your head, he said, I can burn your brains up. He said, you just don't have no idea. He said, the government is usually 30 to 40 years ahead of the private sector. He said, what I'm telling you is, he said, we've had this stuff for 40 years to some extent. He said, there's some other things that's a little bit more than this. And he said, every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, he said, we come up with better and or more refined things. And he said literally, and this is thin, he said, we have very strong computers. This is back before people had them in their home, unless he was a millionaire. And he said, we can use IBM computers, military computers, and if you give us the name of somebody, it could take a few hours, might even take a day to connect all the dots, but we can very, very rapidly track down anybody, anywhere in the world. If they're in the jungle, we can find them. If they're on a submarine, we can find them. He says, we just have lots and lots and lots and lots of technology. He said, now, there's always that 1%, even 2 or 3%, that our equipment malfunctions, operator error, or they really have some advanced system on their end that protects them from us on this end. He said, I have things on my phone, and he said, I have things on my home and on my cars that they can't touch me, just in case we get a rogue agent that wants to put a notch in his belt and do away with me somehow. He said, it's like survival of the fittest. He said, you remember those Indian tribes? I said, yeah. And he says, any man in a lot of Indian tribes could challenge the chief to be the chief, and he'd have to fight him to the death if he challenged him. And said, sometimes that's the way it is in the industrial military complex. He said, but what I'm telling you is they're merging law enforcement and the military industrial complex into one big ball, whether you realize it or not. He says the police will be militarized. They won't even realize that they're militarized until they're there. But they'll be used to the big boy toys. They'll be used to the tanks and the fully automatic weapons and gearing up like they're ready to go to war. And things will happen that they'll be glad to have this, and said it'll be like having a army in every little city in America that we can use how we want to. He said, it ain't started yet. He says, not in earnest. He said, the little trial one. But he said, you'll see here in a few years that you'll start to see police get high-end radios. They'll start having a lot more training than they have now. You'll see government interactions from military bases with local police in their area to desensitize them and to draw them in. So based on things he said then, things I've seen over the years, there's just extrapolation that the CIA and the military, the whole entire military-industrial complex, and the law enforcement are merging together now. The Department of Defense, they know that. They understand it. Certain intelligence agencies understand it. There are some people, very few people in law enforcement that understand what's going on. Probably the top 2, 3, 4% understand. You're talking maybe several hundred, men and women across the country that's got a high enough pay grade that they understand that they're merging certain things. There's a lot of things the military-industrial complex does not give to law enforcement. And the reason they don't give it to them is because if there was a civil uprising on a national level, then if the police had all the ability that the military has, and the people being police in their local cities would worry about their own families, and the police might turn against the military and actually be the people's friends, real peace officers. Okay, so they always keep them down a few notches from where they are.
Okay, and do you know what agency this guy was from that was telling you about it?
Well, he was in the United States Marine Corps since just before Vietnam started. And he got shipped to Vietnam, and he was in a recon unit. And he basically, at the very end, before the war's over, he helped him and his men and other soldiers escape. And he did, he used his mind, and he could think on his feet. So the CIA come and recruited him as an intelligence officer. So he helped them with intelligence in Southeast Asia for, however many years. Then he comes stateside, and he did stuff stateside and overseas both. And then he said, probably in 86 or 87, so I guess he'd been in 20 years or more, he said, look, I just want to go get an everyday job that I can use some of my skills at and be a good and honest man. He said, I had a come to Jesus meeting. And he said, I don't want to go to hell. I want to turn around and do good. And he said, but I can only do so much without jeopardizing my own life or that of my family. So he says, but I'm going to try and turn the tide, but it's like turning the ship with a spoon. Very hard. So he went to work for the CIA, and the CIA basically put him back in the Marine Corps in an intelligence position within the Marines. But he had collateral duty with the CIA. So they did all this stuff in 86, 87, somewhere in there. He decided he had enough. So he told them, look, he said, a lot of these things are blood in and blood out. It's like the mafia. You come in through blood, you go out through blood. You live by the knife, you die by the knife. So he said, I've done everything you've asked me. I've done a good job, and I will never make no problems, and I'll be available for a special assignment. But I just want to go back and live a normal life the majority of the rest of my life. So he had a lot of people in the right places, and they said, okay, that's fine. You're not a threat. You've been here, and you've earned your time. So they made some phone calls, and they got him a job at a police department. And that particular police department, I got a job there. I didn't know this guy from Adam's House Cat. But what broke was he was a very protective man, and he knew I was very honest, and I was, a real hard Christian guy and trying to live right. And he saw me almost get hurt and killed one night trying to protect people. And he just he did everything he could to protect me, and the people actually got away. But that changed something in his relationship with me. He realized that he really cared about me. And, he told me a couple things. And I told him some things. I said, my dad used to be in the Marine Corps. And in the late 50s, early 60s, he had assignment to the State Department and the White House and Pentagon and stuff. And I said, he told me some things when I was a little bitty kid, that I was way above my understanding. They thought of them didn't make no sense. A lot of them he was making jokes out of. Like, he had to be over at the Treasury office pushing a lawnmower, mowing the lawn over there. He said that didn't make no sense at all. But he said, then, he said they're beating me to death, and so they want me to re-enlist again and to do special projects. He said I told them no, so they were hard-timing me and sent me to a lot of manual labor jobs in Washington, D.C. He says, and they showed me how tough they could be. Then they turned around and gave me some really cushy jobs.
Okay, I'd like to kind of gear the conversation a little bit to what our community is concerned about, and we had kind of touched on some of this last night as far as the fusion centers and how instrumental they are perhaps in following and harassing regular citizens. Now, some people believe targeting stems from the fusion centers. There aren't that many per se, but perhaps it's being orchestrated from there. I don't know. But so, what can you tell us about the fusion centers and how intrusive they have been, or as far as orchestrating campaigns against private citizens?
Okay. Well, let me say this: FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA. They have a hand in the fusion centers. And these FEMA camps, I've seen 2 of them with my own eyes. I've seen them. They're totally built. It's just like a state penitentiary, for lack of a better word. It reminds me of a Florida penitentiary. It's got double fences, raised wire at the top. It's got entrance gates. It's got security checks. It just doesn't have nobody physically there, at least that you can see. And these are built sometimes.
How many people do you think? I'm sorry to interrupt, but how many do you feel that those FEMA camps? How many do you think they will hold? Well,
one of them I seen would probably maybe hold 2,000, 2,500. Another one maybe several hundred. 300, 400, 500. And the only reason.
Are you talking about like prison camps, or are you talking about rescue? What would be the purpose of these camps? Would they be for the detention or what?
Okay, say you, and 50 of your people, say if they deem you to be a threat, and there's some upheaval in the country, and they don't necessarily going around killing people, although they do, and they have, and they will again. That's not their objective. Their objective is to neutralize the problem. If they can neutralize it, then they issue some federal warrants on you and whomever being domestic terrorists, right? So then they arrest you under National Security Act. They arrest you, and they take you to a FEMA camp. Okay?
Oh, I see. Do you anticipate something like that happening?
It's always a 50-50 chance. I will tell you, in 1993, I had a friend of mine that's a pastor, and him and another guy I know knew Bill Clinton since he was a child. And one of them went to visit Bill Clinton at the White House, and he says to Bill Clinton, and I know this man personally. This is his first-hand testimony to me. Now, of course, it's hearsay to y'all, but he says, Bill, he said, a lot of people think you're the Antichrist. He said, nope, but I'm setting stuff up for him to come in.
Wow.
And, that was really powerful. And they started talking about that he heard that there was some special camps. The word FEMA wasn't used. He said there were some special camps that I'm told out in West Texas, the Panhandle, out in the Midwest out there in the desert, and maybe even other places that can hold several hundred to many thousand people. He said, that's right. He said, if we have a national situation, he said, I've got a computer. He said, I tell the guy to hit it, and it's already got a judge's electronic signature on it, a federal judge that works with us in the administration, and said, all these names are in the computer. And he said, there's about 100,000 names in that thing. And he said, if I give them the go-ahead, they punch it, and it issues up all these warrants, physical warrants. Then they go out and serve these warrants in groups, 3, 5, 10, 20, whatever. They start arresting these people, but they don't go to their county jail. They go to a transport warehouse center. And so then they take them from there to this camp. It's almost like a re-education camp, a retraining center. It is a place where they do psychological warfare against your mind. They either break you or make you seem like you're crazy, or they hold you there indefinitely. And so my friend said, I told him, he said, sometimes we have people that go missing and there's no explanation. He said, are they there? He said, I don't know about everybody. He said, some people that go missing, that's where they're at. Some places are underground. He said, other people don't. He says, but if you go back and say anything I said to you publicly, he said, first of all, I deny it. And after I deny it, then you'll have an accident or something bad will happen. He said, but I know you and I've liked you all my life. He said, that's the only way you got to come to the Oval Office. So, I knew these men, and these were hardcore Christian men, and they didn't lie. They didn't play games. If they said the sun was coming up in the west instead of the east, you better listen to them. They know something. Even when it sounds far-fetched, every single time anything come up, they were proved out over and over and over and over.